Barry Gibb and Cliff Richard, two names that once defined the golden heartbeat of British music, are now bound by a truth that took more than half a century to surface. At 79, Barry Gibb has finally broken his silence, speaking not from bitterness, but from a place of deep reflection. What he revealed about his long friendship with Cliff Richard has left fans stunned, uncovering a hidden story that fame had quietly buried beneath decades of success. Behind the dazzling lights and sold-out arenas, there existed a fragile understanding between two icons, men who carried the weight of admiration, secrecy, and unspoken loyalty. The truth, as Barry tells it now, is not about scandal or rivalry alone, but about love, regret, and the choices that define who we become when the spotlight fades. After years of silence, the question remains, why did Barry choose this moment to tell it, and what truth could no longer stay hidden? Barry Gibb was born in 1946 on the Isle of Man, the second of 5 children in a family where music was as natural as breathing. His father Hugh played in local bands and his mother Barbara kept the home alive with rhythm and warmth. When the family moved to Manchester, and later to Australia, the Gibb brothers began singing wherever they could. Their harmonies, raw and haunting, caught the attention of radio producers, and by the mid-1960s, the Bee Gees were on their way to becoming one of the most celebrated groups of their generation. Fame arrived quickly, but it demanded sacrifice. Long hours in the studio, constant touring, and the strain of success often tested the brothers' unity. Yet through it all, Barry carried himself with calm authority, the quiet architect behind the band's sound. At the same time, another name was echoing across Britain, Cliff Richard. Born in 1940, in Lucknow, India, and raised in England, he rose to prominence as Britain's first true rock star. By 1958, his hit Move It had set the tone for a new era. Cliff's clean image, charm, and unmistakable voice made him a symbol of youthful hope in post-war Britain. While Elvis Presley ruled America, Cliff carried that same energy across the Atlantic, giving Britain its own musical identity. He became more than an entertainer. He was a national figure whose faith and discipline kept him grounded in an industry known for excess. The two men met during a period of great transformation in music. The early 1970s were alive with competition and collaboration. The Bee Gees were experimenting with new sounds, shifting from soft harmonies to the rhythmic pulse that would later define disco. Cliff, already a household name, continued to evolve, exploring gospel influences and reinventing his image for a changing audience. In that world of relentless fame, their connection was one of quiet respect. They admired one another's artistry, shared stages at charity events, and exchanged encouragement during periods when fame felt less like a gift and more like a burden. Behind the smiles and public appearances, both carried private pressures. Barry was navigating the weight of being the creative center of a global phenomenon, while Cliff battled the expectations that came with purity and faith in an industry that often mocked both. They shared the experience of being misunderstood by critics, of living within the image the world demanded rather than the truth of who they were. Music had brought them together, but it also built a wall between them, one made of obligation, perception, and silence. There were moments when their paths crossed in subtle ways. Studio visits, benefit concerts, late-night calls to offer advice or reassurance. Both men understood the loneliness that often followed applause. In those conversations they found a rare honesty, something that fame rarely allowed. Yet even within that bond, there remained things unspoken, truths withheld for the sake of peace. It was not conflict that separated them, but circumstance. As the years unfolded, each pursued his path with unwavering dedication. The Bee Gees conquered the world with their timeless sound, while Cliff stood firm as a symbol of resilience and grace. Behind the glittering lights of success, both were men seeking meaning beyond the music, carrying memories and choices that time would eventually demand to be faced. Now, decades later, As Barry Gibb reflects on those years, the truth he reveals is not about rivalry or scandal, but about the fragile humanity beneath fame's perfection. It is a truth that speaks of friendship, silence, and the price of holding back what the heart always knew. When Barry Gibb finally spoke about his long friendship with Cliff Richard, his words carried the weight of years left unspoken. He did not speak from bitterness or regret, but from a quiet understanding of how fame can both unite and divide those who live within its glow. He described Cliff as a man of unwavering conviction, someone who held fast to his beliefs in a world that constantly tested them. Barry admired that strength. He remembered the early days when the industry demanded perfection, when both of them were surrounded by people who spoke in promises but seldom in truth. In those moments, Barry said, Cliff stood apart. While others chased attention, Cliff carried himself with dignity. Barry respected that restraint, but it also created distance. There were times when they could have been closer, when words of comfort or shared frustration might have bridged the silence between them. Instead, both chose quiet endurance, each protecting the other's image and their own. Barry recalled how, during the late 1970s, the Bee Gees were living at the center of the world's attention. Songs like Stayin' Alive and How Deep Is Your Love turned the brothers into global symbols of success. Yet behind that brilliance, Barry was struggling with exhaustion, loss, and the fear of losing the simple joy of music. Around the same time, Cliff faced a different kind of challenge. His faith had become both a shield and a burden, and public opinion often questioned his sincerity. Barry revealed that they often exchanged messages through mutual friends, each offering silent support when the other was under scrutiny. When the Bee Gees lost their younger brother Andy in 1988, Cliff reached out privately. Barry never forgot that act of kindness. It was, he said, the moment he truly saw the man behind the fame. Over time, their friendship became more distant, not from conflict, but from the paths their lives took. Barry's world revolved around family and the memories of the brothers he had lost. Cliff continued to record, to tour, to keep his faith alive in front of millions. Barry admitted that he admired Cliff's courage, his ability to stay true to his convictions when so many around them faltered. Yet there was something else he confessed, something more personal. He spoke of regret, not for what was said, but for what was left unsaid. There were years when he wanted to reach out, to acknowledge the bond that had quietly shaped both their lives. But fame has a way of creating barriers stronger than pride. Barry said he carried that silence like a shadow, one he never meant to keep. When he finally decided to speak, it was not to expose or to judge. It was to tell the truth about what it means to admire someone deeply and say nothing for too long. He described Cliff as one of the few people who truly understood the loneliness that accompanies success. Beneath the glamour, they shared a mutual respect, built not on rivalry, but on the recognition of endurance. As Barry's voice trembled during that revelation, the sadness in his words spoke of years lost to silence. The truth was simple and human. He had always admired Cliff, always respected his strength, and always regretted letting time create distance where there could have been closeness. It was a confession not of guilt, but of gratitude. What emerged was not scandal but tenderness. Two lives, once connected by fame and now bound by memory, revealing the quiet truth that friendship, like music, never truly ends. It only changes key. When Barry Gibb's revelation became public, it sent ripples through the music world. For decades, their friendship had existed quietly in the background, rarely discussed, often overshadowed by the size of their individual legacies. Now the truth Barry shared gave that bond a new meaning. Fans who had followed both men since the early days of British pop saw the story not as a confession, but as a reminder of how deeply human their idols had always been. The music that once defined a generation now carried a different kind of emotion, one rooted in honesty, maturity, and forgiveness. Cliff Richard responded not through grand statements but through grace. He acknowledged Barry's words with calm appreciation, choosing to focus on the kindness behind them rather than the years that had passed in silence. For Cliff, it was a moment to reflect on the shared history that stretched back to a time when the world was young, and both were learning how to carry the weight of fame. Their careers had followed different rhythms, but the respect between them never faded. As the world revisited old recordings and performances, listeners began to hear the echoes of their shared journey. Cliff's voice carried the optimism of the early years, while Barry's harmonies told of struggle and triumph. Together, their songs traced a map of resilience, two artists who had survived changing trends, shifting audiences, and the passing of time. Behind every lyric, there now seemed to live a story of friendship that had endured beyond public recognition. For Barry, speaking the truth brought a quiet peace. He had spent much of his later life reflecting on the cost of success and the meaning of legacy. In interviews following his revelation, he spoke of gratitude for the people who had walked beside him, and for those who had stood silently, offering support when words were too heavy to speak. Cliff was one of those people. Their connection had not needed constant expression to be real. It had lived in gestures, in respect, and in understanding. The aftermath of Barry's words also sparked conversations about the emotional toll of fame. Both men had lived under constant public scrutiny. Every gesture, every choice, had been magnified and judged. To admit vulnerability in such a world required courage. Fans saw Barry's truth not as an exposure, but as an act of healing. In acknowledging the distance that time had created, he reminded the world that behind every song lies a story of sacrifice and longing. Cliff, ever composed, chose to celebrate the revelation as a gift of honesty. In later years, he spoke warmly of the Bee Gees, calling their contribution to music timeless. He described Barry as a man of remarkable depth, someone who had turned pain into art and love into melody. Those words carried no trace of discomfort, only gratitude. It was as if the unspoken friendship of the past had found its closure through truth. For the public, this story became more than a moment in music history. It became a reflection of life itself, the importance of saying what must be said before time takes the chance away. Both men had built their careers on different foundations, but in the end they met on common ground. Their bond was no longer defined by fame, but by understanding. Barry's revelation reminded the world that behind every legend is a human being who longs for connection. It transformed the story of two icons into something deeply personal, something that spoke of the courage it takes to speak the truth, and the quiet redemption that follows. Time has a way of softening the edges of memory. For Barry Gibb, now 79, truth became a form of peace. Speaking about Cliff Richard allowed him to release what fame had once required him to hide. It was not an act of revelation for attention, but an offering of gratitude to a man who had walked a parallel path through history. In his quiet words, Barry honored Cliff's strength, his belief, and his courage to remain grounded while the world around them changed. Through the decades, both artists had carried the legacy of entire generations. Barry, the creative force behind the Bee Gees, gave the world melodies that defined an era. Songs like Stayin' Alive and How Deep Is Your Love still echo across time, symbols of resilience and creativity. Cliff, born 6 years before Barry, stood as the cornerstone of British rock and faith-driven pop. His career began in 1958 and never truly paused, a record of perseverance that few in music have ever matched. When Barry spoke of him, it was with admiration for that constancy, the same dedication that had inspired countless musicians after them. The public response to Barry's words was not filled with gossip or speculation. Instead, listeners heard sincerity. They saw two men who had spent lifetimes giving music to the world finally meeting in truth. Their story reminded people that behind the spotlight there is humanity, that fame never shields the heart from longing, gratitude, or regret. What connected them was not rivalry, but respect, built through years of mutual recognition, shared endurance, and unspoken kindness. Cliff's reaction reflected the grace for which he has long been known. He acknowledged Barry's reflections without grandeur, allowing the truth to stand on its own. For Cliff, whose career has always been guided by faith, forgiveness, and understanding, were natural responses. He spoke warmly of the Bee Gees, praising their influence and Barry's remarkable gift for turning emotion into timeless music. Those words carried the same quiet dignity that had defined his life, affirming that no distance of time can erase sincerity. For Barry, sharing that truth marked the closing of a long personal chapter. He had lived through triumph and loss, through the passing of his brothers, through the noise and silence of fame. By acknowledging his bond with Cliff, he acknowledged the power of connection itself. Their friendship had not needed constant expression. It lived in respect, in gestures unseen, in memories that survived the decades. Barry often said that music outlives misunderstanding, and through this moment he proved it. As both men continue to reflect on lives spent in service of art and faith, their legacies stand as monuments to perseverance. Cliff Richard remains one of the few artists to achieve chart success across 8 consecutive decades. Barry Gibb carries the honor of being one of the most successful songwriters in history, his work shaping pop music across generations. Their achievements tell a story of survival, of men who gave everything to their craft and found, in the end, that truth and friendship mattered more than applause. The revelation that once seemed so startling has since become a lesson, a reminder that honesty is not weakness, and that time can heal the silence that pride once built. For those who admired them, the story of Barry Gibb and Cliff Richard now stands as a symbol of reconciliation. It teaches that even among legends, it is never too late to speak with sincerity, to honor what once was, and to let gratitude replace regret. In the quiet years that follow, their music will continue to echo through generations, carrying not only melodies but the truth of two men who learned that friendship, like song, never fades, it simply changes form and always finds its way home. In the end, the story of Barry Gibb and Cliff Richard is not about rivalry or fame, but about truth. It is the story of two men who stood at the height of music's greatest moments, who faced the loneliness that success often brings, and who found meaning in honesty. Barry's words at 79 reminded the world that sincerity never loses its power. Cliff's quiet grace showed that forgiveness and understanding will always outlast the noise of time. Together they revealed that friendship can survive distance, that respect can outlive silence, and that truth, once spoken, frees the soul. Their journeys may have begun in different corners of the world, but their legacies now share a single heartbeat, a testament to endurance, compassion, and the courage to finally speak. The world may remember their music, but the greater story lies in their humanity. For more emotional stories, check out this video